listening to the Adventuring Party for the 2nd week of August 2024. This week, the party discussed the current state of collectible card games, particularly the craze that's taken over Magic the Gathering. The Adventuring Party is discussing tabletop and rated gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm Warlord Scar, Destroyer of Cardboard.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Eoin.
And we're here to talk about, our once every 77-year episode on the state of the CCG industry and a interesting phenomenon which has sort of overtaken Magic the Gathering, Premier CCG, in the last 5 years or so. Although the origins can be traced back further, I think the conclusion is that in the post-pandemic world is when this phenomenon really started taking off. Known as the game guru of choice, the big rivals to Magic remains Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and relative newcomer Flesh and Blood, I believe.
So the big games at the moment are you've got Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh are still on the go.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of competitive players getting to play for money, Flesh and Blood does that. The Flesh and Blood Pro Tour is going on as we speak in Amsterdam. It is down to the top 8.
Wow. Okay.
And they are playing for serious money. This is not they're playing for €1,000 sort of thing. This is playing for, a serious money.
Okay.
Now, additional current risers. You have Lorcana, which has had initially a bunch of stock issues.
Yeah.
They have eased off, and now what they have is functionally the game is actually having some issues because the people who were trying to get into it from a point of view of going, hey, let's make a bunch of money off this. The money isn't there as much. There's still the cosmetic cards and stuff, but their value is dropping down. Now they may go back up if the game stays viable. We'll see. They had to day one kind of completely errata a common because it was ridiculously power crept everything. But we shall see how that one shakes out. Other ones that come up at the moment is you got Star Wars Unlimited. Now, I personally, everyone's telling me to get into it, and I'm like, no. I don't trust it because for a bunch of reasons, but they designed 9 sets in advance, and I was like, I'm really worried about that. The art, I'm not a fan, and I think they went for kind of cheapish artists, and that doesn't fill me with confidence, I don't know. It certainly seems cheapish artists.
I mean, I feel like most of us older gamers have seen like a half dozen Star Wars TCGs die on the vine.
We come and go, yeah. Like this will not be the last card game that like FFG unceremoniously kills off by accident. But the big issue is when you look at this, Asmodee are in a horrific financial situation. Maybe Star Wars Unlimited can dig them out of it, but at the moment it's still having stock issues, which means it's all selling out, which is great. But if they haven't made enough stock for demand, your game dies back a bit as a result of that. So we'll see how it goes. Everyone's very happy at the moment, but the second set is just coming out, so that's the thing. And the organised play isn't starting till next year anyway, which is wild to me. Oh yeah, we'll have organised play in a year and a half. What? Yeah, it's grand. Really? Where we're going? Do they want a bunch of sets out before they start doing organised play? Fair enough, but we'll see how that one shakes out.
I do find the topic of how a game should organize its organized play scene relatively interesting because it's also sort of the talk behind our the main topic today, which is Commander Magic.
Yeah. I'm going to give a quick shout out, just a couple last CCGs. Digimon, One Piece, Card Fight Vanguard is still on the grow.
Huh.
And there's Shadowverse, Exiles, and there's Battle Spirit Commander. So there's a couple of lower tier CCGs that are still doing decently. Digimon's a good CCG, but like they're doing slightly different things. They get slightly different ideas about some stuff worth looking at. There's there's some interesting ideas out there for kind of some different kind of card games which are doing certain things a bit differently, trying to handle. A lot of them end up with kind of like lane battlers, a bit like Hearthstone. But hell, Star Wars Unlimited is Hearthstone.
And I assume the LCG is dead.
No, there are still companies making LCGs, but the problem with LCGs is they work well, but they have a very restricted player base and it gets harder to recruit over time. So LCG's still on the go. You've got 7C, you've got Doomtown, you've got Vampire Eternal Rivals, and you also still have a Vampire the Masquerade on the go. That's still getting cards. You still got Highlander on the go, bizarrely, even if it is one lunatic in a garage printing cards. Though he may have lost. We'll see if he's lost it or not. It's possible it's illegal. I'm not sure how that one's going to shake out. There are actually a large amount of things still out there. Some of them quite niche. But back to Commander, Shane.
Yes. Okay. I would assume most of the audience have at least a passing familiarity with Magic. The first really successful CCG really got the concept going. In previous episodes, we talked about how the phenomenon of Magic and Magic clones in the 90s fueled a lot of the gaming industry. And I think to this day, CCGs have an outsized impact over what kind of games, what kind of game companies, rather, have money enough to do their various projects. But yes, Magic has always been the biggest. I think basically, I don't think there's ever been anything that's really caught up to it, and it really has. I don't think it's really like it might have leveled off in the 2010s, but it's still incredibly strong. It's still the majority of WotC's output, and it is still something that their parent company Hasbro really cares about keeping the money pump going on. Now, for most of Magic's history, the foundational model has been the 60 card tournament based formats. Like you pick a tournament format, which basically decides what cards are legal in your format, and you make a deck of 60 cards, up to 4 of each card except for the basic lands. And that was originally made to make their tournaments balanced because they realized very quickly that if they didn't, then the madmen who got bought into the early cards would just make a deck of like 30 Black Lotuses, 30 Fireballs, and the spell that you pay life instead of mana.
Channel.
Yeah, and just explode everyone, turn 0, and such. So the 60 card format became the basis, and that was the foundational element of it. They eventually brought on the limited format, which is like 40 card decks that you build on the day because people wanted variety. They basically always ran into the problem of the 60 card format was the healthiest, but a lot of people would find it restrictive.
When you say the healthiest, just numbers wise, or
The one that made the most sense for I build a deck and then we play together with it.
Okay.
Limit is good, but it is meant to be a break away from the 60 card format. I don't want to be playing the same cards over and over. I want to do a mini deck building every time, and they basically made the format out of that as they went. And enough people like that and are willing to spend the money on boosters on the day to keep trying that. And most people play both. But again, these formats, weren't enough for everyone. Everyone started, not everyone, but like people would come up with their own formats to shake up things because each person would have their own. I don't like this part of 60 card. I don't like this card of 40 card, and the result was, you get these weird formats. And one weird format that came up was something called Elder Dragon Highlander. I believe it was a group of Canadian, well, it wasn't the Canadians, but it was a group of judges, the high level judges who look over tournaments and, answer rules calls. And they decided they wanted a format to basically essentially play between rounds of a game, like when usually or one or two of them might be called away for 2 or 3 minutes in a tournament, but the rest of the time they're just sort of sitting around. So they wanted a slow format that wasn't too competitive, didn't require trying really hard to win, just sort of a casual format to play. And they came up with an idea of, instead of having 4 of each card that wasn't a basic land, let's make a format where you have 1 of each card. And instead of a nice solid 60 card deck, let's bump it up to 100 to make. So instead of like having 10 cards, you have 4 copies of for a consistent deck. Let's deliberately have the least consistent deck possible, an oversized deck with only one of each card. And then they came up with an additional rule because they very specifically wanted people to play those big useless creatures that you never get to play otherwise. So they added something called a commander. Originally, the commander would have been one of what are called the Elder Dragons, these sort of big, expensive boss monsters from an early set of the game.
Oh, I dimly remember those.
Yes, so people like Nicol Bolas or the Victus Asmadi.
Well, lots of multicolored requirements. So yeah.
Yeah, so the idea was you'd have this card called your commander, and that would be sort of it would define what colors you'd have in your deck, and it would be always be able to play it from outside of the game, but put it in as your big boss monster to make a big splashy experience. And this was their fun thing, and they called it Elder Dragon Highlander because there can only be one of each type of card, and you have an Elder Dragon or some other similar legend. And this format gained popularity. Oh, sorry. The other major thing was it was designed for multiplayer. It was designed to have usually around 4 or 5 players in a game because that's generally how many judges you had at an event. And they would put this together and just have these fun casual games where you're playing big, gigantic spells as you never see anywhere else, or some weird niche combos as you never see in any 60 card game because it was meant to be the opposite of all these really try hard, super optimized decks that they were kept, they were judging at the time. And this format, through the early days of the internet, the idea of the format sort of proliferated as you would, and this became a sort of alternative to the free for all melee multiplayer games that I remember from the early 2000s era, which generally just ended in one player going infinite and exploding the entire board. This slightly this more less efficient format tended to result in better multiplayer experiences for most people. You still got the people who wanted to be as competitive as possible about it, and they have their own thing of printing off, proxies of all the $500 cards and making super big combo decks that can win in turn 2, etc., etc. But otherwise, this format just sort of potted away in the background, slowly becoming the multiplayer format of choice for casual play. And this was something WotC themselves didn't do anything about it first because it was a fan format, and that wasn't their job to do anything with that. It just sort of became a thing that the original judges and players organized and helped spread across time. But they did notice that it was becoming more and more popular, and eventually, someone at WotC, almost definitely Mark Rosewater, just kind of got it something in his craw about. Okay, so we're doing all of these optimized card releases for. We tend to listen an awful lot to the tournament players. The tournament players who want their 60 card decks and they want balanced cards and interesting interactions and cool, efficient ways to win the game and, interesting limited formats for when we play that. We're listening to them an awful lot because they're the ones who know the most about the game, know the most about the rules, probably have their finger on the pulse of what we might call the game's health, as it were. But they also noticed that was a very small part of the actual player base. I think they said like 5% people ever played a tournament. And they got this idea in the head that there was this wide blue ocean of what they called kitchen table players. People who put together whatever cards they had, made whatever decks they wanted, and were just playing away casually. And just over time, the feeling built up. How do we reach those people? How do we make a product for them? And eventually, printing silly rules mini games on the special bonus card and the booster wasn't quite getting through to them. Various interesting little products would have been tried over the years, but the one that they tried eventually is they decided to make an official Elder Dragon Highlander game. They made official Elder Dragon Highlander decks, 100 cards, variety things, and they called this Commander. And this was not terribly optimized decks, but built in the spirit of Commander. And these products started selling really well. And so every year or so, they would put out another Commander set, including some of the cards from the current meta game, and just slowly building up this repertoire of Commander things as an extra format on top of the ones they had. And then we get to 2020 and the pandemic, and something odd happens. First, they can't host tournaments. So tournaments, since you have to buy down, there's a much bigger emphasis on what's in Magic the Gathering Arena, their online format. But also, just because players can't get together at game stores anymore for casual Magic, what tends to happen is that people are going to have to play at home or in small groups of people who are willing to be exposed to each other. And in that format, something like Commander is way more appropriate for the social situation than something like, we take our tournament decks, which we haven't using, even though cards are still coming out. We're not really investing terribly in booster boxes like a tournament player would. We're just making these Commander decks and playing with those. And so WotC pivoted towards providing Commander products. And in the last 5 years, it certainly seems like this has paid off for them, as now every single card release, every single set released will come with 4 or 5 Commander decks, or where before pandemic you would expect a set to come out with some 60 card decks with some, not so great cards, but some ideas of like what kind of decks we think tournament players would build. Instead, they come out with Commander decks, big 100 card, like €60 minimum blocks of cardboard to sell. And there's a feeling that the tournament scene has almost been forgotten in a result. So much of the game is now focused around providing sets as normal. They still have the same release schedule. In fact, it may have ticked up, but also a lot more bonus products that really only make sense if they're designed for commanders. I'm sure we've talked. Have we talked about Universes Beyond? I don't think we've had a specific episode.
Not as yet.
Okay, well, just to say, there's a much bigger emphasis on what we might call fun characters that can be used as commanders, either from other IPs or something made up for Magic. An awful lot more emphasis on multicolor cards because those are the more flexible commanders. And there's this feeling that the design of the game has shifted towards providing for commander players, and the emphasis on tournament play as the core of the game, where King gets identity, seems to have gone away. And it's just such an interesting phenomenon, both because it feels like it's something that's trying very hard to give players what they want, and it seems to be working in terms of, cards sold. But is it actually helping the game long term? This is where the opinions come out. It does seem like tournament play has been very much de-emphasized. And even though there's the big swing back after COVID, obviously, people are back in the game and they're playing again.
But the numbers, like,
it's not even the numbers, it's the types of tournament screens. For most of the game's life, what we would consider the basis of the tournament scene is what's called standard. It's like the last 2 or 3 years of sets. So partly they're increasing that number to like 5 years of sets now, because the implication is that people have always complained, oh, I have to buy new cards every 2 years. I hate this. I want to like build up a collection. And apparently they're now listening to those people when they've been ignoring them for 20 years before this. And now they're putting more emphasis on the longer, the formats that have more cards. One called Modern, which I believe has the last 15 years of cards in it or so.
okay.
And they're printing more products specifically for that. And Standard, which was the standard for what a tournament in Magic would be, has been massively de-emphasized. And for modern tournaments, another format called Pioneer, which is like 10 years of cards or so. Also, one called Popper, which is a gimmicky commons only thing. So there's a much bigger emphasis on either formats which are super old and let people who've been building massive collections over the years use their cards, or stuff that is cheaper to get into. The emphasis really seems to be on rewarding people who have big collections of cards, as opposed to people who have bought the latest hotness. But yeah, we're just sort of in this where we're starting to ask. Clearly, Commander is absolutely the most popular format. People seem to have loved it. But is it the right thing for CC to be emphasizing its casual do anything format versus its, listening to the tournament people who got the game through its first 20 years of like, this is what's best for the life of the game. This sort of churning of formats keeps the CCG fresh, it keeps the interest up. Various logics that people have argued about for years, which seem to have been proven out over time, only for them, not the post-COVID world, to really switch up and change design to focus on this one casual format over any other.
I mean, what it kind of comes down to is standard rotates or used to rotate very quickly. So it was difficult to justify spending hundreds of dollars building decks to then be like, oh, now I've got to get a new standard deck, So modern does better for that point of view. But the thing about EDHs or Commander is that most commanders are multicolor because you want to include lots of colors. Because you've only got one card, one copy of each card. So to get more stuff, you're like, oh, I'll play multicolor guys. And there's a number of commanders who are deliberately designed to be multicolor. You still have to buy 36 lands. And because they're all multicolor, they've all got to be dual or better lands. Even if that's just the new guys getting in, I mean, that's serious money. And that's serious money for every casual player. Like, if I decided I want to build a sliver deck, I could buy... There was a pre-constructed sliver starter for, was it $120 or $200?
Yeah, something like that. 120, I believe, was the premium decks that it up.
Didn't come with a mana base. So if I wanted to buy that, get into Commander, I'd have to spend 120 on the slivers. Probably another 100 in more slivers. And probably 200, 300 in mana.
Yeah.
And then I'd have a deck. And the end result of playing that deck would be people just going, I'll kill Owen first. He's got a sliver deck.
It is an interesting one because I've seen an awful lot of talk around about the. First off, it's one of those formats where is it better to be super powerful or not? Should you actually make a weaker deck because then people leave you alone and let you go off into the corner and build up your weasel deck or whatever you've made in the side until you find all your combo pieces and go off and then a horde of weasel comes over the mountain and eats everyone. There's all kinds of arguments with like do you need a super powerful mana base? Certainly, if you don't want to spend a third of all your games just doodling around with the wrong colors of mana. The big emphasis on this like casual format is that casual means different things to different people, and because it's the premier format, they sort of lost its ability to just be four guys with downtime at a tournament making a big long hour long game of nonsense happening in each deck, and if someone has to get up for 5 minutes to do a judge call or whatever, it doesn't matter. We can just sit around, wait, and resume the game when he comes back. When that goes from something we come up with ourselves to no, this is what millions of people are playing, the weaknesses of the format start to come out. The psychology of people comes out. Like, some people are going to say, oh, this is multiplayer, everything has to interact with multiple players, I have to do all the politicking, have to do cards, players have to vote on and stuff. And then you get other players say, oh, this is the format where I play all these big creatures and never get to play anywhere else, or big super spells are too inefficient for turn play. This one card, the first card I ever opened, that has been my joy of my soul for 20 years, never got to play it. This is the format for that. And then you get other people who's like, this is just an informed like any other. I'm going to play the most efficient cards and destroy all my opponents, or do a combo that wins on turn 3, and the only way to stop it is have 2 different kinds of counter spells. You're going to get all these people in the mix, and because it's a casual, loosey-goosey format, there's very little way to filter those people. People have to essentially try to self-filter, like, well, I'm happy to be in this cutthroat counterspell war competitive table, but can I get my own group of people like that? Whereas the person who has bought a €50 pre-constructed deck 10 minutes ago, what table do they go at? There's no way to signal, oh, this is the appropriate table for me, this is the level we should be at. And because, it is a multiplayer format where, players can gang up on each other or not, just looking at a list of cards is not going to tell you you should go here or you should go there, because, it's very possible for the big competitive deck to, well, any deck in Magic can get mana screwed or whatever. That's sort of the thing. But the variance compounds on variance compounds on variance. And for a lot of people, that's the appeal. But as the premier element of the game, it's a different paradigm than what we're used to. We're used to people making as efficient decks as they can, experimental decks showing up to try to disrupt the meta. Everything being based around like what's good for the health of a tournament scene, which not as many people in the game worried about, but it seemed to have been fine for 20 years. It's the unanswerables that are things. It's like, because these were the silent majority who were apparently buying cards occasionally enough to make decks and have fun on their kitchen tables, were we ignoring a massive part of the player base, or were they just happy as they were? And then we gave them everything that they thought they wanted, and now has that made things better? It's a whole bunch of hypothetical questions that I don't think there are any solid answers for, but there are an awful lot of opinions.
Yeah. I think it sells a lot of cards to people who otherwise don't buy crazy amounts of cards. So that's good. It mobilizes some of their kitchen table player base, which is good for them. It's inherently a format that's not as bad, doesn't need to be as closely balanced. There's a lot of upsides for them, and they can sell them giant starters, and they'll buy giant starters, whereas a constructed Magic player will be like, I'll just buy some singles, man. I've been at this too long.
Mm.
Yeah. Dave, if the thought to suddenly invest in a CCG was to occur to you and you were going to try Magic, would you want a through line to high level play where you join tournaments, you talk to other tournament people, you invest in a deck, get better, try a different art, get better over time, or would you be looking for a casual? It doesn't matter if your deck is crap, in theory, as long as you pick the right people and get the right table of casual players.
I'd very much be favouring the casual play, because I have some ancient cards from about 5th edition of Magic.
Yeah.
Honestly, tournaments aren't really my thing, just in general. So definitely the casual approach.
Yeah. You see a lot of doomsaying about these kinds of big shifts in the demographics of the player base. In theory, it's the same players. It's just they're a different cohort of them is leading charge, leading design. But it's also people are worried about the feedback loop, as I said. Like recently, they've started putting out, as I said, sets specifically for the modern format, whereas before everything went through standard. And there's a million reasons for that, but they're noticing that there's an awful lot of strong cards that seem to have been designed as commanders that have disrupted the tournament meta. There's one that recently came out that everyone is screaming for bans on because it's like the new Oko or whatever. I think we mentioned Oko in the podcast like 5 years ago. But yeah, there's a worry that even the tournament scene, the kind of cards that are getting in tournaments are changing because commander decks are being pushed so much, and because they're all technically released, even if they're not on a standard legal set, they're still technically legal in other formats. So you get weird things like people having to buy like 4 copies of commander deck because there's one funky rare in one commander set that they can that is useful in a tournament setting. I don't know how often that happens, but that seems the theory that it might happen seems to worry some people. I don't know, but yeah, It's a phenomenon. I definitely think it is changing things. I don't think it's changing things necessarily for the worse or the better.
Change is going to happen, and people are going to complain. Like, those are constants.
Yeah. There is also the question of this is, something's called, is the snake going to eat its own tail? Are they, after 5 years of the dominance of Commander, they're starting to release so much more Commander content for the game? There's a lot of people who are complaining, well, like, okay, they're releasing new must-have Commander cards every set. Isn't that just turning Commander into the tournament standard where every set comes out, you have to buy this certain number of cards, and then have they accidentally started turning Commander into the next standard by making sure people have to buy cards every set? That's a increasingly loud complaint from the community. Who as I said, got into this. Particularly the older Commander players got into this by picking some crap legendary rares from their card collections, which might stretch back 20 years, and putting them together in a deck and shuffling up. They're complaining, oh, now we need to have the $120 mana base, this card, and this card, and this card, and have to use this combo. Or is it right for I think it's good for Wizards to be putting in more casual products after years of people asking for it. They're putting in more starter level products again in the next couple of sets. But does the Eye of Sauron corrupt automatically? Does just the fact that they're putting emphasis on something, does that going to inevitably push it too far?
I think ultimately what they're doing is they're trying to monetize a different player base. But while doing that, they're introducing a huge, like, they're deliberately doing more magic sets aimed at different people. And the problem is a commander player might have to buy a bit from all of them. Keep it, like, because if you're like, oh, that'd be great in my deck, I've got to go buy this single now. Or it's like, oh, I buy these 4 new commander decks because they've got a bunch of new commander stuff in them and they're $120 each. Like that's a lot of money, you know. And then like there's this secret, like, oh, I should buy that secret rare or that secret lair because it's got a cool version of that commander I play. You know, I would imagine there's a lot of financial pressure on you if you want to try and keep up. But I mean, I suppose the advantage is you can go out. I won't try and keep up. I'll build my deck and I'm done.
There's not much they can do about the I build my deck and I'm done players, because those are always going to exist, and they are probably the core of the original Commander people. That the oldest Commander players probably have decks 20 years old, have been changed in 10, and there's a question of is the modern Commander even for those people anymore, or is it for the influx of new people who want a casual format, even though the pressures of having a mana base and having all the latest removal spells, what have you, it's hard to know. Again, I feel myself trying to stick around neutral on this, in that it's not necessarily better or worse than the push for standard rotation. I just think it's different. But there is an argument made that the emphasis is maybe too high, and maybe after 5 years, pandemic's not really over, but I think we could say that maybe take a different shift. And there are signs, as I say, that they are doing that as they bring out more starter products with different sets, whereas before they'd sort of been forgetting to do that and just letting people get absorbed into the casual commander thing as it came in. But yeah, that's just sort of a breakdown of the current state of Magic and the worries. Would it even be Magic if there wasn't a whole bunch of people complaining about how it had been ruined forever?
Well, they're trying to suck as much money out of you as possible. Complaining is valid. Are they doing more cards like Cyclonic Rift, which are really, really, really board affecting, specifically in Commander, or ones that are more difficult to counter? Basically, it's like, oh, we can't just counter that.
I feel like it's a mix, honestly. Big board wipes are coming around, but there are also a lot more must-kill commanders. So I see every time I look at a tips video for commander buildings, it's like, play more removal spells, play things that kill different things. For the love of Jeebus, please give your deck the ability to kill things. That seems to be advice that is going around, and is not helped by the fact that the commander decks that WotC sell themselves tend to have relatively underpowered mana bases and not that many ways to kill things compared to what people are recommending. You can see maybe that's part of the problem. Are they doing it deliberately because they want to put in more fun cards, or is it just an oversight? Like, again, it's a format that technically, while WotC released products for it, technically it's still that group of judges that are actually still organizing the rules for Commander. They're the ones who decide if a card gets banned or not, and they don't like banning any card if they can get away with it.
Yeah, that cuts it out of the market.
Even then, there's all kinds of talk about the spirit of the game, and banning cards should only be done if it's actually just like making the game worse. As I said, it's a deep thing, and there are whole YouTube channels and whole podcasts about how it's been ruined forever 1,000 times. So that's sort of our update on what it is. I personally think if you're not a CCC fan, I'd say wait a couple months for more starter decks to come out. I think actually at the moment I think there are 2 starter decks out. So starter set for the Assassin's Creed Special Edition, which is a thing, and for the new Bloomborough Redwall inspired game. So those are, I'd say, if you're a casual person curious about Magic, look at those first, play a few games of that before you invest in a 100-card monstrosity, even if they are conveniently being provided for 50, 60 euro. And maybe check out what the local tournament scene is. Is there one? Do you have one? Or is it all Commander players? And ultimately, this doesn't really change the kitchen table phenomenon anymore. The majority of games are still just people at their houses cracking whatever decks with whatever many cards, whatever format they want, and just going at it. So ultimately, Magic's meant to be flexible for what suits you. That's the reason it stayed so popular for so long, is that ultimately you could take charge of your Magic and decide, well, all our decks are 100% lands. We don't want to buy singles or whatever. Anyway, that's my rant.
A fine rant it was too.
I've learned 1 or 2 things.
Well, if you'd like to get us at a round table and destroy us all with a combination of consulting demons and talking to fish, you can hit us up on our social media or come join our Discord. But for now, this party's over. Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.